Hello everyone. In this lesson we're going to let users update and delete their own blog posts, but we're going to make sure they don't have permission to update and delete other users' blog posts. In order to set up or work with permissions like that, we're going to learn about something in Laravel called a policy. Let's jump into the action and let me explain. So the idea is that if I go to my profile and then I click on one of these posts that I've created with this user account, well, not only would we only want these icons to display if you are indeed the owner or author of this post, but then even just to view the edit post form that should show up when you click on this, you should only be able to view that form if you're the owner, you should only be able to submit the form if you're the owner, and you should only be able to actually delete the post if you're the owner. In other words, we're going to have multiple places in our controller functions and blade views where we need to decide whether the current logged in user should have permission to modify the current post or not. And instead of duplicating that logic, right, that check where you see, does the logged in user ID match the user ID of the post, instead of spelling out that logic check over and over and over again, wouldn't it be cool if we could just define it once in one centrally located place and then leverage that logic or point towards that logic whenever and wherever we need to check? Well, in Laravel, there's something called a policy, and that's exactly what it's going to let us set up. And what's really cool, and why I'm such a big fan of how Laravel handles permissions like this, is that it's not just going to let us recycle that check in our controller methods, but we can also use it in our blade templates, and we can even use it as middleware. Now, to get started in this lesson, before we actually create a policy, I first want to show you what a policy is rescuing us from, or the problem that a policy would be solving. So let me first show you what we do not want. I think it's important to do this so you understand why we would bother using a policy. So to get started, let's try to decide on our own, without using a policy, if we should show these edit and delete icons when you visit a single post, right? So in other words, is your current logged in user account the owner of this post? So in this screen, I'm logged in as the Brad user, so that's the author of this post. I should see these icons, but if I visit this same URL in Firefox, so in this window I'm logged in as Barksalot, if I visit that post, we should not see these icons right here. So let's go make that decision or that check without using a policy. So here's what I would do. In VS Code, go into your post controller. So Control or Command P and search for post controller. And we're looking for the function that we named view single post. In the body of the function, we would essentially want to compare the user ID of the blog post with the user ID of the currently logged in user. So for example, you could say if parentheses curly brackets. For the if check, I would say if $post, look inside it for user ID. Only if that triple equals, and then call auth, look inside that for the user function, look inside that for ID. So if that's true, let's just return a string of text that says you are the author, and then after the if, let's say return, you are not the author. Semicolon after both of those return lines. Let's save. So in this window, I am the owner or author. If I refresh, cool, you are the author. In Firefox, if I refresh, perfect, you are not the author. So that wasn't rocket science, but the idea is that this raw mechanical check, where we're actually spelling out, the super specific properties that we're trying to compare to see if it's a match, the idea is that we don't want to have to spell this out more than once, right? We don't want to litter our application by spelling this out in 5 or 6 or 10 different places. We want to sort of abstract this away in just one centrally located place, and then throughout our application, we want to use metaphorical language like can or cannot the current user update or delete a post, right? But we wouldn't want to have to spell this out more than once. So what is a policy? A policy is going to let us spell this check out just once, and then we can reference the check in as many different methods or blade templates or routes as we want to. So you can go ahead and get rid of this if check and get rid of that extra return you are not the author. Cool. So basically just put it back to the way that it was 30 seconds ago. We can save that. You can refresh. Perfect. So the idea now is let's set up a policy to perform that same check. We can actually create a new policy from the command line. So open up your command line and type this in with me. PHP artisan make policy space, let's give it a name. I'm going to name it post policy, and then space dash dash model equals uppercase post. So this extra model flag, this option here, and we're setting it to post, this will just add a bit of extra boilerplate so that our policy knows from the get-go that it's tied to the post, the blog post model or the blog post resource. If you need to pause the video to type in this command with me, that's okay, but I'm going to go ahead and press enter. Okay, now what did that just do? Well, if you look in your sidebar, you can see that in the app folder, there is a folder named policies, and there's a brand new file, postpolicy.php. So jump into that new file with me. Cool, so now if you think of any of the CRUD actions that have to do with a blog post, there are functions in this file. So view, right, that's like reading the data. Scroll down a little bit more, there's one for create, and then if you scroll down, there's one for update, and then one for delete. So the idea is within any of these functions, you just return either true or false regarding whether the current logged in user should be able to perform that operation for a specific post in question. Let me give you a quick example. So scroll down to around line number 54. That's where we should see the function for update. So this is really cool. Laravel already filled out this boilerplate for us, so it includes parameters of user and post. So in this function, it's all you and I have to do. Our only job is just to return true or false. So here's what I'm going to do. Let's say return, and then let's just compare to see if the logged in user matches the user ID of the blog post in question. So return $user, look inside it for ID. If that, triple equals $post, look inside that for the database column of, user underscore ID. So if that's a match, the triple equal signs is going to return a value of true. Otherwise, it returns a value of false. And let's just copy this line of code and do the same thing in the delete function, right? So around line 67, you see function delete. Just paste that into the body of the function. Whoops, you can see I forgot the semicolon at the end of each of those two lines. So let's give that a save. And now we do need to let Laravel know that our new policy exists, right? So before we can start leveraging and pointing towards this, we need to register it with Laravel. To do that, all you need to do is go into your app folder and then the providers folder, and you should see a file named authserviceprovider.php. In that file, if you look around line number 15, you'll see protected $policies. And in this array, we just want to add an item. So right above this line that's commented out, or at the start of the array, let's just say uppercase post : class. So for that model, and then it's an associative array, so equal greater than, and then it would just be post policy : class. So we're just saying for this model or this resource, this is the policy that should be applied, right? This spells out who should be able to perform those CRUD operations for a given resource. So we can save this file, and now the question is, how do we actually leverage that post policy? So let's give ourselves a goal. Let's start with these icons on the View Single Post Blade template. So before we even worry about the actual database action of submitting the edit form or actually deleting a post, let's just start with visually displaying the icons or not in this template. So all you would do is dig into your single post blade.php file. Around line 5, you see this span ends around line 10. We would just want to wrap this in some sort of conditional check, right? You should only display this if you have permissions. So here's what I would do. Before that span line, say @ symbol for a blade directive, and we're going to say can, parentheses to call it, and then let's just check for the update action. So quotes, update, comma, and then give it the current blog post in question. So just $post to access that, right? That's already been passed into this blade template. And then after the end of the span, we can end that with @ symbol end can. Let's give this a save, and now if you refresh where you should have permission, cool, the icons are there, but in this window in Firefox, I'm logged in as Barksalot. If I refresh, perfect. So let's explain how in the world this is working. So back in our code, we're essentially saying if the current user can update this post. So now let's go into our post policy file to make sense of what's happening. So that's going to call this function in our post policy, right? The update function. And it's receiving everything it needs to make that decision. It's receiving the current blog post in question. It's also receiving the current user in question. It can perform that comparison. Awesome. And just to be clear, we didn't explicitly or manually pass it the user. Laravel will do that for us. So whenever you're working with a policy function like this, the first parameter is always going to be an instance of a user. Cool. So we've seen how we can use our policy to decide if we should show or hide something within a Blade template. Now let's change gears and think about what should happen when you actually click on the red delete or trash icon, right? The actual act of deleting it from the database. Now there are two different ways that you could handle this. Number one, you could check our policy in your controller method, right, when this icon gets clicked or when this form gets submitted. Or option number two, you can check your policy in the routes file, right, through a middleware call when this delete form gets submitted. So that's the beauty of a policy. You can effortlessly use it from all three angles. You can use it from the Blade template angle, you can use it from the controller angle, and you can use it from the router middleware angle. Let's first set up this delete functionality from our controller, just so you're familiar with it. There's no right or wrong way. And then once it's working, I also want to show you how to switch it to use the router middleware way. So let's start with the controller way. So right now I want you to jump into your post controller. So controller command P for post controller. And above or below one of our public functions, maybe right here, let's create a brand new public function and name it delete. Parentheses, curly brackets. Let's give this a save. And now what we need to do is when this delete icon gets clicked, it's going to submit a form, and we just want to set up a route, and the route should call our delete function in our controller. So here's what I would do. Go into your routes folder, and then jump into the web.php file. Here we have our blog post related routes, so I would just set up a brand new route, so uppercase route, : and it's actually going to be a delete request. So we're going to call the delete method. We give it two things. The URL pattern would be quotes /post/ and then curly brackets post. So identical to the GET request route, only it's a delete request instead of a GET request. But the same URL pattern. For the B argument, this would be, an array, post, controller, : class, comma, and then we named our method delete. So go ahead and save that. Okay, and now back in our post controller, let's spell out our delete function. So first of all, we just saw in our routes file that the incoming variable is going to be named post, right? And that's going to be the ID number of the post that you're trying to delete. So in our parameter, in our controller function, let's say, use type hinting, use the post model, fill in the metaphor of what a blog post is with the incoming post variable. Okay, and now within the body of our function, let's check to see if the current user can or cannot, if they have permission to delete the post. So let's call the auth function to start working with the user that's logged in. Look inside that, call the user function, and an instance of a user is going to have access to methods of can and cannot. Let's call the cannot method, and then you would just give it arguments of if they cannot delete, this post. So this would return true or false. So I would actually use this as my if condition. So I would copy this into my clipboard and I would say, if parentheses, curly brackets for the condition, just paste in your clipboard. So we're saying if the current user cannot delete the current post, then we wouldn't want to actually delete it. So I would just return a string of text that says, you cannot do that, semicolon. Below the if statement, this is where we would be safe to actually delete the post. So we already have the current post in question. It's just $post, look inside it and call the delete method, semicolon. Once we've deleted the post, let's just redirect the user back to their user profile, right? So they can see a list of any and all remaining posts that they still have. So I would just say return a redirect, semicolon, and redirect them to quotes /profile/, but then we want to concatenate on their username. So period to add on, and then just call auth, look inside it, call user, look inside that for username. After the closing parentheses, but before the semicolon, we can even add on a flash message, so call with, And let's give it a message of success, or a label of success, so it's green. And then the actual message could be, post successfully deleted. Cool, so we can go ahead and save that. And now we just need to make sure that our delete icon submits to the correct URL when you actually click on this icon to send over the form. So back in our Blade template, right, our single post blade.php file, around line 8, we see a form. So just fill in the action. Instead of a hashtag, it should be quotes, /post/ and then the ID of the post you're trying to delete. So just double curly brackets, $post, look inside it for ID. Let's give this a save and test it out. So I'm logged in with my Brad account. Be sure to refresh so this is actually pointing to the correct place. But if you refresh, if I delete this, my newest test post, whoops, and that totally makes sense. Remember, for this URL pattern, we set up a delete request, not a post request. So back in our Blade template on the form, on this opening form tag, you can leave the method set to post because normally a traditional HTML form can't send a delete request. But thanks to Laravel, we can just say @ for a directive and say method, call it quotes delete. And normally you can only send delete requests like this from JavaScript, but this lets us do it right from our HTML form. If we save that, I'm pretty sure we're going to run into a CSRF message. So let me attempt that one more time. If I click the delete icon. Perfect. Yes, 419, that's the CSRF message. So in addition, right before the @method directive, let's say @CSRF. If we save that, and if I go back, refresh, if I try to delete this post, beautiful. That post is removed from my list. It took me back to my profile. We see the flash message, beautiful. Now, to make sure that it's only working because I'm the Brad user, not the Barks-a-Lot user, here's what you could do. So for example, you can see that the Brad user owns the post that has an ID of 4. Here's what you could do. Go into Firefox or a different browser. In this browser, I'm logged in with Barks-a-Lot. But the idea is if I go to a post that I do have permission with Barks-a-Lot, so if I create a brand new post with Barks-a-Lot and then I'm visiting that post, what you can do is right click on the trash can, click inspect, and if you scroll up a little bit, just find the opening form tag and just change where it's posting to. So for the action, I'm just going to double click on that. And instead of 6, which Barks-a-Lot should have permission to delete, if I change that to 4 and push enter, right, I've modified that. So now I'd be trying to send a malicious request to delete a post that isn't even mine. That's a Brad post. If I click the red delete, awesome. We see you cannot do that, right? And that's thanks back to in our post controller. Remember, we have our if check, right? If the current user cannot delete the current post, return end the request with this. Cool, so that was an example of how you can use a policy from within a controller method. In our next video, we're going to pick up right where we're leaving off here. We're going to see how you could use your policy from within your routes file with middleware instead. Don't worry, once we get that set up, we can start moving along again, and we'll also set up the update or edit form. Let's keep our momentum rolling, and I'll see you in the next video.